righty. We're back. Lindsay, you want to take it over and introduce Zoe for us?
Sure.
Awesome.
So we have here today Zoe Stapp. She works for Brookdale Farm Supplies and Brookdale Fruit Farm, and we brought her in because we feel that it's really important for the flower farms to understand about irrigation and how it works. And we thought the best way to do is bring in somebody who does this on a daily basis. So we're going to let Zoe take it over and tell us a little bit about the history of the farm and all about irrigation. Thank you, Zoe.
Thank you guys for having me. Can everyone hear me well? Is it working?
It's working. Thanks.
Perfect. All right. So my name is Zoe Stapp. I work with Brookdale Fruit Farm and Brookdale Farm Supplies, and we are located in Hollis, New Hampshire. So a little bit about us. Our farm was established in 1847. It's currently owned and operated by the 5th, 6th, and 7th generations of the Hardy family. We farm hundreds of acres, and we have around 10 acres that are certified organic. We grow everything from fruits and vegetables. We do a little bit with cut flowers, a little bit of everything. We don't do Christmas trees, but other than that, we pretty much grow it. Our farm is made up of 4 major business units. We have our wholesale side, which we sell fruits and vegetables wholesale to other farm stands, to grocery stores, and to other like distributors of produce. We have our retail stand, our pick your own, which is strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, cherries, apples, and sunflowers during apple season. And then we also have the farm supplies division. So this, where's the pointer? Here we go, figured out. This farm right here is our home farm. We mainly irrigate out of ponds and surface water. We also have a few wells, and these are just some pictures from around the farm. This is us planting trees fairly recently, and some of our apple trees in bloom. And then this is a nice throwback photo and another apple display we set up a few years ago. On the farm supply side, we sell a lot of different companies' products. So that allows us to really pick and choose what we like from each one and kind of make a system that works well for the Northeast. So it allows us to kind of pick and choose. We're not necessarily committed to one specific brand. We can get any product from any of the brands we sell, but we're really able to customize it. Like for us, we use a lot of Netafim orchard tubing, but we really like Toro's drip tape. So that's typically what we'll recommend to people, but we're also, if someone has a preference, we can get them that as well. So today we're going to look at the different types of irrigation. We're going to do an entire system overview. We're going to look at drip versus overhead. We're going to talk about fertigation, so fertilizing through our irrigation system. We're also going to look at soil moisture, and if we have time, I've got some cool new equipment to look at as well. So when you start off thinking about irrigation, it's really important to take that broad view and look at it from a system standpoint. You don't want to have to start really small and then in 2 years rebuy the pump, the filter, and all your large expensive items. So it makes sense to work with your local irrigation supplier. We offer this service to all of our customers for free. We'll sit down with you either in person or on the phone and really walk through your entire farm. What do you think you're going to want to irrigate? And that can be a completely different answer from what are we irrigating this year. And so that really allows us to customize the system from the beginning and save you money, as opposed to having to be like, oh, here's how to irrigate 1 acre. And then next year we have to completely scrap it and start over. So we'll sit down using Google Earth, pull up a satellite image, and really walk through each individual field and kind of lay out the whole system. And then we can pick and choose what pieces to start with. So there's 2 main types of irrigation. There's overhead irrigation and drip. Overhead irrigation is like 55 to 75% like efficient. It requires a lot more water than drip to put down enough inch of rain. So for overhead, you're looking at 27,154 gallons of water to get your inch of rain. For drip, because we're putting that water exactly where it needs to go in the root zone, we're able to use a lot less water. So to get the equivalent inch, you're looking at 9,396 gallons. And that can be up to 95% efficient because we're not wasting water. We're only watering kind of where the plants are. So the overhead irrigation waters plants and weeds. it tends to waste water because you're watering the whole area. It works really well on row crops, especially corn, sometimes pumpkins. It tends to need more expensive equipment, and you need to maintain it a lot more because you're talking a lot larger scale. It requires you to visit the field multiple times during operation, and you can't really be picking while you're irrigating because otherwise you get soaking wet. It also really increases your disease pressure. So you're getting your whole entire plant wet. So you're increasing the humidity and you're allowing all those spores to kind of spread. It really is not ideal for a cut flower operation. It's going to wet the flower and it just kind of trashes your product. Will it work in a crisis if that's all you have? Yes, but it's not something we necessarily really want to look at for the cut flower industry. Honestly, the only thing we overhead on our farm is corn and occasionally beans if we don't have the drip set up in that field. So drip irrigation delivers water right to the root zone. It uses 1/3 of the water that overhead irrigation does. You have little to no evapotranspiration. So because we're putting the water right in the soil, you're not losing any of it to evaporation. You can set it and forget it. So you're able to start it and let it run, and you're not going to have to constantly go back and move reels or sprinklers around. You set it up for the season and that's it. You can fertilize through the drip irrigation. It decreases your disease pressure because you're not getting the plant wet, and it doesn't restrict access. You can be out there harvesting, weeding, doing whatever you need to do in the field while you're irrigating and you're not getting soaking wet. So for drip tape, the most common tape that's typically used in the Northeast is 5/8 tape. There are larger sizes of tape if your rows go over 1,000 feet, but that's something to chat with your supplier about. It comes in a range of emitter spacing. So 4, 6, 8, and 12-inch emitters are the most common around here. There's different flow rates of the tape. A high flow tape is typically 0.45 gallons per minute per 100 row feet of tape. And the low flow tends to be 0.22 gallons per minute per 100 row feet. It does require filtration. So whether you're pulling from a pond, a well, or anything, we need to put a filter on that system and filter the water down to 150 microns. This is so we don't clog the drip tape flow path, and it operates at a lower pressure than overhead. So it operates between 12 and 15 PSI with the tape, where overhead we typically are at least 45 pounds of pressure or higher. All right, so this is our basic layout. So you have your water source, whether it's a pond, river, well, town water, anything like that. We have our pump. Sometimes for wells, it might be included in the well already, so it might be something we don't really have to think about. And then you've got your filter. Usually there's a check valve, so you don't push any water back into the water source and pollute it. We do a filter to filter out that water, and a injector if you'd like for your fertilizer. And then we run a main line or lay flat out to the field. And then in the field, we'll have our pressure regulator and the header hose. So we're going to walk through each component of this system as we go. So most crops, depending on what you're growing, require around 1 acre-inch of rain per week. And this is assuming we don't get any rain. Irrigation really allows us to kind of mitigate our risk and really like an insurance policy. Unfortunately, we haven't figured out what to do when it rains all the time, like last summer, but it really allows us to grow in drought conditions, and it makes it a lot better. It doesn't feel like you're rolling the dice as much. You're really able to control that at least your plants are getting watered, and it's a good insurance policy. So the acre-inch of rain is 27,154 gallons per acre per week. So if you figure roughly a 20-week growing cycle, you're looking at 545,000 gallons per acre. So in a 4-hour run cycle, an acre has roughly 7,210 row feet. If we're using a high flow tape, you're looking at 32 gallons a minute, which is 7,787 gallons per hour. So in order to get that acre-inch of rain, we want to run roughly 3 times per week. For our crop, if we're using a lower flow tape, we're going to run pretty much double that, 7 times per week, just to get enough water out there. If it rains and you get more than 1 inch of rain, you can skip a day or 2 of irrigating. And we'll talk about how to look at your soil moisture levels later in this presentation. So coming to the water sources, there's a bunch of different ones. You can use well or town water. If you want to be able to easily irrigate an acre at a time, you're looking at 20 gallons per minute per acre. Surface water tends to be the most common in the Northeast. You can use rivers, ponds, anything like that. We use quite a lot of ponds. For a pond, if you have a pond that's 100 feet by 100 feet and it's 8 feet deep, that's 600,000 gallons of water. Even if you don't have a spring necessarily feeding it and you're able to collect the surface water with rain in the fall and snow runoff and all that, that's a huge benefit to have a pond or something on your farm or to dig one. And then for a lot of people want to irrigate out of a 250 gallon tote tank. And while that seems like a lot of water, it needs to be filled up 28 times for 7,000 gallons of water. So you need to fill that tote tank 28 times for one irrigation cycle over an acre. So it's a lot of hassle to go back and forth to your tanks. So that's not really the best option. If we were in a limited water situation, we'd want to look at the well gallon per minute and try to design something around that, or look at constructing a pond or other options. So for pumps, there's a bunch of different options. You definitely want to work with your local irrigation supplier to figure out what's going to work best for your situation. This tends to be where one of your largest investments is, but it can last for quite a while. Like we have some pumps that are over 20 years old. So there's you can get an electric pump, which typically requires an electrician to install and electricity at your water source. It does allow for easy automation though, because we can get the whole system automated and it can turn the pump on and off for you. For gas pumps, you need to look at a high pressure pump, not a trash pump. Trash pumps are really good at moving volume, but they don't make enough pressure to get through the filter, the injector, out to the field and have enough pressure left over for the drip tape. So we need to get a high pressure pump. The gas pumps are very easy to use. It's kind of a set it and forget it design. We use a lot of these little 9-horse pumps and you put a gallon of gas in and it runs for around 4.5 hours. So you put your gas in, runs out of fuel and it shuts off, and that finishes one irrigation cycle. You can also, there's larger diesel pumps available or PTO pumps that can be operated by a tractor. A lot of times you have an older tractor that's not quite roadworthy anymore, but it can run a pump. That's also a good option because you don't then have to pay for the engine. Pump placement is really important, especially coming off of a drought year. It's something to think about. We want to get the pump as close to the water source as we can. Pumps are really good at pushing water. They're not really good at sucking up water. So you don't want a 100-foot suction hose out through the woods to the pond. You want to get that pump as close to your water source as possible. We use these floats to float our suction hose. So it's below the surface of the water. So it's not sucking up all the algae, but it's not sitting on the bottom of the pond sucking up all the muck. If you have a big algae problem, we'll take a garden hose off the pump and shoot it right over the water to clear out all this algae. So you can see the algae over here. And by just spraying that garden hose out over the foot valve, it really helps kind of push away a lot of the surface debris. Another trick, if you're in a low water situation or a brook or something, you can zip tie your suction hose to the top of a milk crate and fill the milk crate with rocks. And that kind of helps keep it close to the bottom, but off the bottom, so you're not sucking up all that muck. The next piece of the irrigation system is going to be your filter. So we like to keep your filter kind of close to the water source. It just helps prevent like a lot of algae growth in your main line. You're filtering out a lot of stuff. And it's also easier for the operator. They can go start the pump, change and check the filters and go from there. So there's a couple different filter options. There's disc filters or sand filters, which are very common. Both of these for surface water. If we're looking at a well water situation, depending on what's in the well, you'd be either looking at a disc filter or a screen filter. And there's just a bunch of different options out there. These are built to manually backflush. So you open up the top valve, close the bottom valve, and it cleans this filter. And then you switch and do the same thing with this side. So you're able to backflush that filter every time you start up the pump. So again, we want to filter it to 150 microns so we don't clog the drip tape. We like to run twin disc filters or triple or quads typically. to run in parallel. This reduces your pressure loss, so one doesn't get super clogged. You're kind of able to send water through both. It increases your filter capacity, and then you're able to backflush the filter with pre-filtered water. On the single filter assemblies, you're backflushing it with kind of pond water, which helps loosen up all the debris that gets stuck in these rings, but it's not as great as if you were to backflush it with clean filtered water. So these are the 2 filter cartridges. This is a new one, or a clean one ready to go. And this is one after 4 hours of runtime, just out of this pond right here. So it's kind of dirty, but not disgusting. But these filters definitely catch quite a lot. And you wouldn't want all this in your tape getting it clogged. So typically after our filter, we'll plug in a fertilizer injector. We'll get into more of this when we get onto our fertigation part. But just a quick overview, there's 2 different types of fertilizer injectors. The brand name is called Mazzi injector. It's a Venturi action, and it's regulated by the flow of water. Or a Mixrite or a dosatron is more of a greenhouse injector, or we'll see it in smaller scale irrigation systems. It's a pump style. It's constant feed and precise measuring. With both of these, you can only use water soluble fertilizer in them. If you use something that's not water soluble, you'll end up clogging your drip tape, your drippers if you're in a greenhouse, and the injector. So the lay flat hose is your high pressure supply line. It runs from the pump to the filter, and then from the filter out into the field. You can drive over it. It lays completely flat when there's no water in it, and then it kind of fills up when there is. The heavy duty lay flat is typically red or gray, depending on which manufacturer is. And that one's rated for 125 PSI. And the blue lay flat is the lower pressure one, and that's up to 80 PSI. The red lay flat, or the heavy duty lay flat, is definitely worth the investment. It's less likely to get pin pricks in it. If you're driving over it pretty regularly, you definitely want to go with the red. The blue lay flat is cheaper. It's not gonna last as long. Like the red lay flat will at least last for like 6 or more years. The blue lay flat, you'll be lucky if you get 2 years out of it. The blue lay flat does work well in drought years. If you're trying to get to a field that you typically don't have to irrigate, it's kind of a good stopgap to get that water to that next spot. So from the lay flat or the main line, we go to a pressure regulator. And we like to make these little H stations right here. So you have your high pressure inlet and your low pressure outlet. So this H kind of allows you to carry water to the next field if we need to, while still teeing off into other blocks or drip fields. So you attach your header hose to here, and from this header hose is where you plug in your drip tape. This right here is a pressure gauge, so you know what your inlet pressure is. We'd like this around 30 pounds. And then right here, this little brass guy, that's a pressure regulator. So that's going to knock it down to 12 PSI. We like to put our pressure regulators in the middle of the field because it allows for even water distribution. So if A and C are both at 12 PSI, by the time we get down to these bottom corners, B and D, we're going to be right around 8 to 10 PSI, depending on the length of run. If we had our pressure regulator over here, by the time the water got to C, it would already be at like 8 or 10 PSI. By the time we got down to corner D over here, we'd be around 6 pounds of pressure. So we wouldn't really have even distribution of the water all throughout the field. So this is our header hose, and it's a black with a blue stripe on it. It's kind of soft, you can squeeze it, but it's not as flat as the lay flat. This hose can take up to 43 pounds of pressure. So it needs to go after the pressure regulator so we don't blow it up. It's a softer hose that we can punch into. It has some liquid Teflon in it, so it's actually going to seal around the fitting and not leak. So these drip fittings, we punch into this, and then we connect the drip tape onto that to run down the length of the row. We've already chatted a little bit about drip tape. Drip tape is a flat, low pressure tube with various spaced emitters. Depending on your crop spacing and how many rows you have of crop per row of plastic or raised bed determines the number of drip tape lines we put down. If you're just doing one line of plants, we're going to put one line of drip tape. If you're going to do 2 or more lines of plants, we'll do 2 rows of drip tape. So this, especially for cut flowers, allows us to kind of get that even water distribution throughout the bed. There are various spaced emitters. Anywhere from 8 to 12 inch tends to be the most common. If you have very close spacings, sometimes we'll go with a 6 inch or a 4 inch or very sandy soils. You always want to install the stripe or the emitters up on the tape. So if they're allowed to like open and close to let the water in and they don't end up sucking dirt in. If it's flipped over, it doesn't really work correctly and they tend to suck up the dirt or debris and end up getting clogged. So on all rolls of drip tape, no matter what the brand, you'll find a couple of numbers on there and it looks like a part number. It is the part number, but it also gives us a bunch of information. So this first number right here, this 5, that tells us the size. So this is 5/8 strip tape. The next 2 numbers are the mil or the thickness. So this would be an 8 mil drip tape. So there's a bunch of different mils. We like using 8 mil for annual crop. So you're going to replace it at the end of the season. It holds up a little bit better, is a little bit stronger than 6 mil tape. So it works well in the Northeast with all of our rocks in the soil. Sometimes people like a 10 or a 15 mil. We tend to use that in a more perennial crop or like biannual crop like strawberries. Some people use it in peonies. It really depends on kind of your production system. The next 2 numbers are your spacing. So this is a 12-inch strip tape. It might say 08 or 06, and that would tell you it'd be an 8 or a 6-inch. And then this is your flow rate. The flow rate of 4.5 means 0.5 gallons of water per minute per 100 row feet. So drip tape always gives us the flow rate, and they call it a Q100, which is how much water it puts out in 100 feet of tape. So that allows us to really compare all the different flow rates easily, as opposed to having to do a bunch of different math, being like, okay, 6-inch puts out this much, 12-inch puts out this much. So it always gives us the flow rate per 100 feet of tape. You also want to check, all the manufacturers have a length of run, like the longest length of run you can run with the flow rate and the spacing. And you really want to just double check to make sure you're set up for success and you're not trying to run too long with a tape of a higher flow. There's a pressure moderating tape on the market from Toro called Flow Control. This is a really kind of new innovative design. It's been out for, I think, 3 or maybe 4 years now. We've switched to all flow control on our farm. It is a pressure moderating tape, so you're able to run a lot longer of a row. It gives you more uniform yields. And the best part, because none of us really have flat fields, is it's able to handle some elevation change. So it can go up and down, and each emitter is going to put out the same amount of water. It's not going to kind of pool at the bottom and pool at the end, and the top is just going to be super dry. It puts out the same amount of water through each emitter. And it's really ideal for crops that are heavy feeders or you're going to fertilize often, because the fertilizer is getting distributed evenly. So this graphic, I think, is a really good one to show the uniformity is really important. So if you're on really flat ground, all your plants are going to get the same amount of water. They're all going to grow consistently. Poor uniformity, if your drip length of run is too long, so the manufacturer or your drip tape says, it can only go 500 feet and you go 700 feet, these plants at the end aren't going to get as much water as all the plants up here. So they're going to grow a lot smaller and you're not going to have the yields you want off of them. The same issue goes for if you have some elevation, you'll get the water pooling at the beginning and the bottom of the run, but at the top, it'll be really dry. So that's another issue, especially if you're trying to get this plant as wet as it needs to be, you're actually going to end up flooding the bottom and the top. So this is where that flow control comes in and really helps, where if with flow control, each plant or each emitter puts out the same amount of water, whereas the regular drip tape, they don't get all the same amount. So the plants towards the lower part of elevation or the beginning of the run get way more than they need, and the ones at the top of the hill or the end of the run are pretty dry. So one thing to consider when selecting your drip tape flow rate and emitter spacing is your soil type consideration. So the water holding capacity varies in different soil types. Your basic ones are split out clay, loam, and sand. So clay, the water really likes to move laterally, but doesn't go down as much. Loam, we kind of get this nice ball. It moves laterally and down, which is really nice. And sand, it kind of likes to just go straight down and doesn't like to move out laterally. And this really helps us determine. So if you have sand, we're going to get you a closer spacing drip tape, spaced drip tape. So those hopefully will all line up and you'll get kind of water throughout the run. Loam, you can kind of stretch it out a little bit. And clay, we can go with a further spacing because that water really likes to move laterally. Another thing we can look at is pulse irrigation. So where you have pulse irrigation, you want to just kind of water at one bit. It can help with sand to kind of help spread the water out. And then you'd turn it on again and water for a short period, and that water will be able to spread out a little more. And then you'd water again and it would spread out even more. Where if we looked at the same soil under continuous irrigation, you'd turn it on, run it for a while, and it would just run straight down. So if you have very sandy soil, we're going to be looking at closer emitter spacing and shorter run times and maybe multiple per day to really kind of try to get that sand and water to move out as opposed to straight down. So these are the common like tools and stuff that we'd use in fittings to connect the drip tape to your header hose. So we often like the starter with valve because you're able to shut each line on and off as needed. This helps if you need to fix a hole, if you're done harvesting that one row and you still want to irrigate the other rows next to it. This is a regular starter, so there's no valve, so you'd run the whole thing at once. And then this is a starter with a 200 series barb, and it's a really small barb that punches into the header hose. One of the problems is you actually don't get enough water through this tiny barb fitting to fill the entire drip tape. It works well if you have a short row like 50 feet, but if you're going any further than 50 feet, you really want to go with this 400 or 420 series barb because it's going to let enough water in to fill that entire drip tape. So this is a drip tape end plug. Can go at the end of the row, especially if you're using for bare ground, and it has a little loop on the end so you can attach a rubber band to it and kind of stretch it out so it'll stay in place so it's not wiggling all over on you. Some helpful tools when you're setting up your irrigation. You can use a screwdriver to tighten your clamps, but if you're doing a lot of them, it gets to be a pain. So you can actually use an impact tool you can just put it right on and just tighten up your hose clamps. And that just makes life a lot easier. We like using liquid Teflon. You can paint it on all your like end caps and couplers and stuff. It helps it slide together easier. And it also kind of helps and prevents it from leaking. When cutting drip tape, you want to use sharp scissors or a sharp knife because you want a complete square cut so it's able to slide onto the fitting correctly. And then sometimes I like having a paint marker more towards the end of the season so I can mark what stuff has a leak so we can decide if we want to repair it or replace it. And that's just, I try to carry it around with me starting in August just to mark where there's issues. So for installing irrigation, you want to start with laying your plastic and your drip tape down, get your rows set. Then you're going to put out your pump, your filter, and your injector. You're going to take your H station or your pressure regulator and place that in the middle of the zone. You're going to run your lay flat from the pump filter to the H station. We're going to connect the header hose, the low pressure sides, and then you're going to punch in the starters to the header. You're then going to turn your water on before you connect the drip tape. If you don't, it's really hard to get the tape on the starter and have it successfully stay on without blowing off. So turn the water on, and that really kind of helps to make the tape rigid as you put it on. You're going to then walk to the end of the field and put on the end caps, or you can like fold the drip tape over itself and sleeve a cut piece over to make a little compression fitting. And the reason you want to turn the water on before you cap the tape is you want to make sure none of the tape got twisted or cut as you were putting it out into the field. You're going to then check the system for leaks. And once that's all ready, we like to pre-irrigate before we transplant. So we like to run usually about 2 hours to kind of get that soil nice and wet, and then go through and transplant. So you're not transplanting into like powder. So to operate the system, you want to open the valves that you want to irrigate that day, close the valves you don't, check the oil in the pump, start the pump, back flush the filter, check for leaks, and check pressure in the field. So now that we know how to run the irrigation system and set it up, we're going to look at soil moisture. Before we do that, are there any questions on irrigation? All right, we'll start looking at soil moisture. So how do we know how long we need to irrigate for, and how do we know what's going on? So it's always important to check your soil moisture level. The easiest way to do it is to grab a handful of soil and kind of squeeze it together. When you open up your hand, if it stays kind of in a ball, that's pretty good. It's not like it's not falling apart. You don't need to irrigate. If you grab some soil, kind of let go and it starts to crumble, then it's pretty dry and you're going to need to irrigate that day. They have a whole kind of chart on it and everything. Usually we get it through NRCS. So that'd be something you can just like Google like soil field chart or whatever, and it comes up. And that's a very handy way to do it. You can do it right under your plastic. You want to kind of dig down an inch or two, or if you're growing bare ground, just dig down. You don't want just that top layer, because that can get a lot drier before the rest of the soil. So dig down an inch or two and kind of grab a handful and see where we're at. So if you want to get a little fancier than that method, there are a lot of soil moisture meters out there. You want to make sure that it's measuring in kilopascals. And the reason that's important is because kilopascals are what all the universities use for soil moisture measurements. There's a lot of literature out there on what range is acceptable for your crop. So there are some sensors out there that'll tell you like wet or dry. The hard part with that is some crops like it a little drier than others. So it's really important to get a soil moisture meter or sensor that measures it in kilopascals, because that gives you actual data that you're able to then go to the literature, go to your extension agent, and really talk about, is this the right range for my crop? We really like the watermark sensors from Aerometer. It's these little gypsum blocks that you can glue to PVC, and then you go around with this digital reader and it gives you the reading. In kilopascals, 0 is in water like a giant bucket, and 100 is completely dry. We typically, depending on the soil type and crop, like to keep it between 20 and 40 kilopascals for your range. You can kind of fluctuate in there. On drought years where we're running out of water, we'll let it kind of get up to 50 as well, just to drought stress it a little, but not too much, to save the water. You do want to put 2 sensors in per reading location. So you want to read your shallow soil moisture and then the deeper soil moisture. And that allows you to know how long to irrigate for. So we'll do 2 sensors at 6 inches and 12-inch depth for annual crops. For like apple trees and all that stuff, those are going to be at a lot different depths. So this is a graph from 2016 of rainfall, and soil moisture is this red line right here. So we were trying to keep it between 20 and 40 psi, or 20 and 40 kilopascals. This right here is when our pond ran out of water. So we weren't able to irrigate, and then we were able to irrigate a little bit, but then we started getting rain September, October on. But it's really important, especially as we're seeing more severe weather events. So we tend to see a very dry spell followed by a lot of rain. By using your soil moisture, you're able to make sure you're not putting on too much water, but you're also able to kind of keep it out of that drought stress level as well. All right, so now that we know about our irrigation system and how to tell when we're irrigating enough or too much or whatever, we're going to talk about fertigation. So fertigation is feeding or putting your fertilizer through your drip lines. So this really saves us a lot of time, hassle, and it really allows us to spoon feed the crop and put the fertilizer right where the plants need it. So this is a fertilizer injector. You've got your check valve right here, so no fertilizer goes back into your pond or water source. So the water is going to come in, and then you've got, this one's a little different. We built this one for 2 different sized injectors. So you're able to have the water come up, go through the injector, and back out to the field. You've got this gate valve right here. This allows you to either open it completely so the water goes straight through if you just want to irrigate, or you slowly close this gate valve until the injector starts sucking up fertilizer out of this barrel, and then you leave it and let it run the fertilizer out. This is a Mazzy injector, so it's just sucking up fertilizer and putting it through our irrigation system, and our drip tape is the thing that actually puts out the fertilizer. So because each drip emitter puts out the same amount of water, your whole entire field is getting an equal amount of fertilizer. There are a lot of different fertilizers out there that can be put through your drip tape. You just need to make sure that it's water soluble. So there's conventional and organic options. For the conventional options, we do a lot with Plant Marvel. It's a common name in greenhouse industry as well as in the field, and they have quite a few different formulations available. They've got a 12-5-19, which is really nice with a micro package for your vegetative growth. A K-Mag, which is what we typically use once they start flowering to keep those blossoms going, and that's a 15-5-30. You could use the Super Start around transplant because it's got that higher phosphorus just to kind of give them a kickstart, especially if it's colder out. On the organic side, we have a NutraAg Enviro line, which is OMRI certified. So you'd start off with that higher nitrogen, the 1201, while they're in vegetative. And once they start blooming, you're going to go to that 5020 with that higher potassium. You can also use Neptune's Harvest fish fertilizer. They screen theirs and filter it through a 150 micron filter, so it's not going to clog your drip tape. If you use fish fertilizer, you want to make sure you rinse the fertilizer barrel out after, otherwise you get that like fish scale on the inside of your barrel. And with all of these fertilizers, you want to make sure you run clear water. So you want the fertilizer injector to kind of keep injecting, and you want to keep irrigating for at least 15 minutes after the fertilizer's barrel is empty. And this just allows you to kind of flush the lines out of all the fertilizer, so it's not sitting in the lines feeding any algae. So an important note is the Mazzy fertilizer injectors work off of the flow rate. So we need to make sure we know how much water we're putting out in a zone, so we size the injector correctly. And this is something your irrigation supplier can help you with. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I can kind of help you figure it out. It's pretty simple to figure out your own flow rate, and we can walk through it quickly. So you want to find out the drip tape you used, what numbers they are. So we know the last numbers are our flow rate. So we put out 0.45 gallons per minute per 100 row feet. If we have 1 acre of like drip tape out, that's 7,210 feet of tape. So we take our total row footage divided by 100. So that is 72.1, multiply it by our flow rate, 0.45, because that's in 100 row feet like increments. And that gives us a flow rate of 32.45 gallons per minute. So we take that number, look at the Mazzy injector chart. So we see that we could be either a 3/4 injector, because that's in that range. We're looking at 32 gallons a minute, falls into the 9 to 50 range. Or we could look at a 1-inch injector, 16 to 80 gallons a minute. So either of those injectors would work to irrigate 1 acre with the higher flow drip tape. So that's really important going forward. Like you get a system, you have it spec'd out, and then the next year you change your fields. You just want to run a quick flow rate calculation to make sure we've planted things that want to be fertilized together in the correct size blocks, so you're able to continue to use the same injector. So this is just a sample fertilizer schedule that we'd follow. So the first week of transplant, we'd fertilize with a starter fertilizer. That added phosphorus can kind of really get the plant going and prevent transplant stress or cold injury or anything. The second week or week 1 after transplant, we'd still do the starter fertilizer for 1 more week. The only exception to this is if it's really warm, like you're transplanting in June, you don't necessarily need to do the second round of starter just because it doesn't really need the phosphorus. You're not worried about cold feet. Then from then on until bloom, you're going to feed a vegetative. So you want that plant to kind of keep growing and picking up its nutrients. And then once it kind of starts to form the blossoms, it looks like it's about to open, we'll go through and start feeding that bloom starter, that 15, 5, 30, and you're going to feed that right through pretty much until you want to be done or frost is coming, or if you run out of water. Prior to putting the fertilizer through the system, you want to fill your drip lines for 20 to 30 minutes. So you make sure the entire system's full, up and running, check for leaks, and then put your fertilizer through. And again, you want to rinse with clear water for about 15 minutes after, just to flush those lines so you don't get any scale, like slime or sludge kind of in there. So really flush and just run for 15 minutes after you fertilize. So this is switching from irrigation to other things that we have or that people are liking for cut flowers. This weed mat is a 1.77 ounce black row cover fabric. So it's from the same factory that makes the row cover. It's UV stabilized. It's a reusable weed barrier, and we use it in the field and the greenhouse. The reason we like this better than the woven ground cover is this allows the rainwater through. And when it rips, it just rips. It doesn't shred. The woven tends to shed the water more. And also when it rips, it's tarp-like. So it's going to keep unraveling and can really be a mess. The weed mat, you pin down with staples roughly every 3 feet, and you can put it between your rows of plastic. If you pick it up every year, it has a 3 to 5 year lifespan. One thing to note, if you spray a bunch of copper, it tends to wear down the weed mat a little bit faster. So you'd probably be looking at a 2-year lifespan, maybe 3 if you use a lot of copper. It comes in 3, 4, and 5 foot widths. One of the reasons we really like this for cut flowers is it kind of forms a barrier against the soil. So you're less likely to get a bunch of your molds and mildews because you're kind of growing like almost not sterile, but you're kind of preventing a lot of splashback from the soil onto the plants and keeps them really clean, especially if you're also growing with plastic. People do plant through this as well, so you can burn holes in it or just kind of like poke a hole in it and plant right through it if you're looking for an alternative to plastic. So this right here is the weed mat on one of our tomato fields. So we have our plastic and then we cover the whole thing in weed mat. This also helps with soil erosion. On those days we get those crazy like 4-inch rainstorms. Suddenly it kind of helps hold everything in place. We also like to use weed mat under our header hose because it doesn't allow all these weeds to grow up. So even if you still want to cultivate and hoe and weed and do whatever, I'd recommend putting at least a 3-foot weed mat under your drip tape header hose. And that allows you to see the leaks a lot easier, access it. And also if you're like cultivating, it helps the tractor operator to see where the header hose is so they don't accidentally hook it and drag it down the field. Another option we were talking about earlier in the talk, they were talking about cover cropping and someone asked how to terminate it. Some people will do the silage tarp, the sale seed beds. They'll mow the cover crop like super, super short and then put the silage tarp on for like 6 to 8 weeks, and that'll really kill it and help terminate it without herbicides. You can also do this just before you plant. It doesn't have to have a cover crop to use the silage tarp. And this is what I was talking about with the woven ground cover. It kind of starts to fray easily. So then just following up a little bit on the soil health, we found on our farm every 5 years, we do the Cornell Soil Health Assessment. And that really helps us to check in and see how we're doing soil health wise. So we do regular soil tests every year to see where we are with all of our minerals and nutrients and all that for each field. And they're very crop specific. So we'll say, you know, this field, we want to plant this, fill it out in our soil, do our different soil test plots around the large area and send it in. Every 5 years, we do the Cornell Health Assessment to just see where we're at and kind of what we need to change. All of our fields we cover crop. We do a lot of cover crop rotations or mixes. So we'll do an early, a late, and a mid-season, or early, mid, and late season. And we'll really build up our soil organic matter. And the reason that's so important is, especially with the crazy weather we've been having, is the organic matter and cover cropping can really help store water in the soil. So you're kind of allowing the soil to adapt to different weather events. So whether it's a year we're going to get a ton of rain or a year we're going to have no rain, having that organic matter high allows you to have a higher water holding capacity, as opposed to if you didn't work on building your organic matter, it just wouldn't be able to kind of help you, give you that buffer. It's not going to act like a sponge. It's just going to run off. Even on drought years, if you run out of water, having a higher organic matter can help when you do get rain to kind of soak up that water instead of letting it run out. There's a really cool YouTube video. We do it like the demonstration on our farm, but if you Google like soil erosion versus cover crop, they'll like pour water over a cover cropped area and you can see how much soil goes in. And then they'll do it on like just bare dirt, and a bunch of soil goes into the like clear container. So if you haven't seen it, it's pretty cool to check out. This is a new piece of equipment that a lot of growers are really liking, especially if you're looking for more of a one tool does multiple things. This is a stone barrier from Forigo. It's an Italian company. It's a reverse rototiller, so it's able to bury crop residue and leave you with like a prepped, ready to go planting surface. You can make a raised bed, you can do flat bed, you can lay plastic, you can fertilize with it. This is one of our old strawberry fields we didn't mow it anything, and one pass we were able to go through and lay plastic right through it. And you can also get these machines with a plastic layer in the back. So you're really reducing your tillage passes. If you have an NRCS contract, they ran a bunch of calculations, and your stir factor on the Forigo is around 70%. So it qualifies for reduced tillage as an NRCS, I think it's EQIP or AMA. I can't remember which program it's under, but this Forigo counts as a reduced tillage practice. So it's a way to kind of adapt your system and do less tillage on an annual plasticulture system. Also allows you to leave between rows where you're not planting, like your walkways, with a cover crop or residue still on them. All right, so does anyone have any questions? Is there anything else we wanted to chat about? Here's my contact information. More than happy to help you guys figure out an irrigation system or chat about different options or equipment or anything like that.
Now's your chance. Any questions?
I have a question, Zoe. On my farm, I have an artesian well, so I have a lot of water, and I have small kids, so I don't really want to take in build a pond when it comes down to it.
Yep.
What is there an alternative, like putting in like a big holding tank in the ground to kind of keep that water? Because I just hate for it just to be thrown out into the field and be flooding my bottom field when I'd like to use that in the long run.
Yep. So we have quite a few growers with artesian wells. You can put in a giant holding tank. You can either put it below ground or above ground. If it's above ground, you just want to make sure you paint it so it doesn't grow a ton of algae. A lot of people will just put a gas pump right near their artesian well and drop a suction hose in there and pull right out of it. But there's definitely makes sense to have a holding area for that water, and a large storage tank will work as well.
Thank you.
So one of the questions in the chat said, our farm has the original well from the 1600s. It was hand dug. It does support irrigation tapes, etc. We collect rainwater. What would you suggest? If your well is working, don't mess with it. If that works, keep doing that. We can kind of zone it for like spec out your system and zone it so you can irrigate off of what the well produces. Oh, it doesn't work. I'm sorry. Doesn't work. So the problem with collecting rainwater, as I'm sure you know, is on the years where it doesn't rain, it's the year we need to irrigate. An option would be looking around to see if you have any town water, if there's any area on your property that tends to kind of collect water or a low spot, you can look at digging that out. If there's any brooks or ponds nearby. I know depending on if your county was declared a drought disaster this year, there might be funding available to help get cost share to install a well just for irrigation. So that's something to talk about. Your local, I think, water and soils office or your extension agent might also know of any programs out there to help with that.
Anything else? Well, Zoe, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. That was very informative, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of folks reaching out to you. I think it is really important to work with an irrigation company on your design, because if you go on and try to do it yourself, it looks really scary. And these folks are the experts. You can just ask that, send them an overhead photograph or a design, and they'll turn it into a magical little diagram.
Yeah, just call. We're here. We use it every day on our farm. So it also kind of helps. I can be like, okay, this sucks to do. So you want to do this the right way now, or here's a runaround for this situation. Because you want it to be easy. You don't want it to be irrigate. You want it to be irrigation, not irritation, because it can be a pain in the butt if it's not done right.
Okay. And Gina said you were so knowledgeable. Thank you for sharing all this. Absolutely.
Thank you guys. Have a good day.
You too. Okay, everyone. So that wraps up week 3 of our risk management series. We have been sending copies of the slides, which is a reminder for Jinjing and Zoe. Please send me a PDF of your PowerPoints, and I'll get those sent out to everybody who was here today. And we're also getting the bit by bit the recordings processed. So if you have been registered, you'll get the recording. And we're hoping to have them up on our website pretty soon too. The link that you went to kind of get into your registration portal, that'll be where you find the links to the recordings as well. Okie dokie. So with that, have a great rest of the day, and we hope to see you next week, where we will be talking about climate smart farming, and we'll have Linda DeArco from Little Farmhouse Flowers talking about all her climate smart workarounds for growing beautiful, beautiful flowers. And then we will also have Zach Spangler from Harvest New York talking about different climate smart innovations. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.